The headlines are everywhere. Trump's September 1st deadline, Russia's countdown to war, JSSM deliveries, and the threat of a preemptive strike. It's all over social media, telegram channels, and even the mainstream press. The world seems to be holding its breath for the clock to run out. But before you panic or buy into the next round of doomsday speculation, let's do what almost no one does. Take a hard look at what's real, what's rumor, and what actually matters for you, your family, and our world. Welcome back to Safety Zone. This is the only place you'll get both the adrenaline of world events and the clarity to see through the fog. So let's dive in. Let's start with the so-called September 1st deadline, a date that's dominated the echo chambers of YouTube, X, and prepping forums. The story goes like this. Donald Trump or his allies have issued an ultimatum to the Kremlin, telling Russia that it must end its aggression in Ukraine by early September, or face massive escalation from the United States and NATO. Some claim this 50-day window is a hard red line, warning that Russia could launch a preemptive attack to avoid being boxed in. But if you look beyond the headlines, the facts simply don't line up. As of now, there is no official communication, memo, or even a credible leak from the White House, the Pentagon, NATO, or the Russian Foreign Ministry that establishes any kind of deadline, ultimatum, or fixed window for military escalation tied to September 1st. What you see instead are a handful of public statements, sometimes fiery, sometimes vague, by U.S. politicians like Senator Lindsey Graham or campaign surrogates, urging for more decisive action against Moscow. These are sound bites meant for the domestic audience, political maneuvering in a tense election year, not concrete diplomatic initiatives or war plans. In fact, if you track these narratives back, they mostly originate from opinion columns, think tank editorials, and secondary media amplifiers, not from the rooms where actual decisions are made. This is not to say that tension isn't real. The US and Europe are ramping up support for Ukraine, and Russia is absolutely recalibrating its posture in response. But as for a drop-dead deadline with the fate of the world hanging in the balance, no, that's fiction dressed up as inevitability. Next, let's look at the idea of a preemptive Russian strike if the West crosses some imagined line. The notion is rooted in a very real and dangerous element of Russia's military doctrine, the possibility of using force, including nuclear weapons, if the survival of the state is seen as at risk. Russian think tanks and even official policy documents have long included this as a deterrent. And it's true that in recent years, especially since 2022, Russian leaders have referenced red lines with greater frequency, warning that deeper Western involvement or attacks on Russian soil could provoke a disproportionate response. But here's the thing, doctrine is not destiny. Having the option on paper doesn't mean Moscow is eager to use it. Every actual move from the Russian side, troop deployments, air defense upgrades, diplomatic threats, has been designed to posture, to deter, to remind the West that Russia can make life very difficult if pushed too far. But none of this adds up to imminent action. The reality is, a preemptive strike by Russia, especially a nuclear one, would almost certainly bring catastrophic consequences for the Kremlin itself. Economic collapse, international isolation, and possibly internal unrest. The cost-benefit calculation for Putin and his circle is nowhere near favorable for such a move, especially when Russia is already fighting on difficult ground in Ukraine and facing unprecedented sanctions and technology bans. What you're seeing, instead, is the steady drumbeat of psychological warfare. Russian commentators raise the stakes in editorials and TV debates. State media floats trial balloons to test Western nerves. Online influencers and telegram channels amplify leaks and supposed insider tips to create an atmosphere of uncertainty and panic. It's classic brinkmanship, signal strength, inject doubt, make your adversary question their own plans. But even at the peak of recent crises, neither side has leapt over the edge. If anything, both Washington and Moscow are proving adept at walking up to the line. But so far, neither is eager to cross it. So where do these rumors really come from, and why do they go viral so quickly? Part of the answer is the political context, both in the United States and in Russia. In a heated election year, American politicians on both sides of the aisle use tough talk to energize their base, show strength, or try to outflank opponents on national security. Russia, meanwhile, benefits from painting the West as unstable, divided, and always one step away from open war. The more the world appears chaotic, the easier it is for leaders in Moscow and Beijing to justify their own crackdowns and aggressive moves. Then there's the machinery of modern media. Think tanks publish speculative scenarios. Pundits cherry-pick quotes for maximum drama. Social media algorithms boost posts that drive outrage or fear. By the time a story is cycled through Twitter, Telegram, and YouTube, it's hard to tell rumor from reality. In this environment, a single op-ed can snowball into fact, a single rumor can become imminent threat. The real winners are the ones selling headlines, building audiences, or shifting public opinion. The losers? Anyone trying to make sense of what's actually happening. But let's not stop there. If you only debunk the rumor and walk away, you're left with the taste of disappointment and the urge to click elsewhere. So here's where we dig deeper. What's really happening on the ground? What's changing in the slow burn of escalation between Russia, Ukraine, NATO, and the broader web of global alliances? First, weapon deliveries to Ukraine continue, but not at the breakneck pace or in the massive quantities some channels claim. Long-range missile systems like JSSM, ATAC-EMS, and Storm Shadow are always under discussion, but their deployment is a process measured in months, not days. Any new delivery is wrapped in layers of diplomacy, logistics, and training. Western partners debate every step, not only because of the risk of Russian retaliation, but because they must balance their own stockpiles, public opinion, and alliance dynamics. Germany's debate over Taurus missiles is a case in point. The Chancellor faces pressure from allies and domestic critics alike, with every move scrutinized for potential escalation. Even when a shipment is approved, it faces the hurdles of logistics, safe transit, training Ukrainian crews, maintenance under fire, integration with existing battlefield systems. These challenges slow the tempo, but also make every step more deliberate and less likely to spin out of control. The same logic applies to air defense upgrades, drone deliveries, and F-16 transfers. Progress is steady but never as sudden as a headline would suggest. On the Russian side, escalation is real, but it's mostly incremental. The Kremlin has ramped up drone and missile attacks across Ukraine, intensified electronic warfare operations, and conducted military drills aimed at signaling both to NATO and to its own population that it is prepared for any eventuality. But the pattern remains familiar: maximum pressure without all-out attack. Russian officials have repeated the nuclear threat, but always in ways that preserve plausible deniability, and rarely, if ever, do they offer concrete, time-bound warnings or ultimatums. It's an art of ambiguity, designed to keep adversaries off balance while avoiding the costs of actual escalation. Meanwhile, in the US and Europe, military planners continue to upgrade intelligence sharing, joint training exercises, and contingency planning for what-if scenarios. But nothing points to a tipping point on the calendar. If you want to watch for real signs of escalation, look for the slow buildup of forces, the rerouting of supply chains, the hardening of infrastructure, not the screaming headlines. At the same time, there's a quieter but just as important front: the economic war. The US and Europe continue to squeeze Russia with ever-tightening sanctions, aiming to restrict access to critical technology, energy markets, and global finance. But the specter of new, total embargoes, especially against third-party countries like China, India, or Brazil, remains just that, a specter. There's no public support or diplomatic consensus for going that far, not least because global supply chains and energy flows are already under strain. India and China continue to import Russian energy, using discounts to shore up their own economies while maintaining strategic autonomy. Western policymakers pressure these countries, but always within limits. They can't afford to alienate partners needed for everything from semiconductors to rare earth minerals. The bottom line? Economic war is fierce, but it is waged with scalpel, not sledgehammer. Any move that risks global recession or alienates key allies is debated to death before ever being enacted. Now you might ask, so if all these scary headlines are exaggerated, what's the real risk? What's the point of paying attention? Here's where things get interesting. The most dangerous risk isn't a Hollywood-style red button moment, a single missile fired on the stroke of midnight, or some deadline that's been hyped by clickbait channels. The true risk, and the one professionals worry about, is the slow, compounding effect of multiple, overlapping crises, what military strategists call a cascade. While the September 1st rumor may be just that, the underlying tension is undeniable and grows more dangerous not by a calendar date, but by the way crises can suddenly interact. Russia, facing setbacks and growing isolation, has every incentive to change the narrative, whether through aggressive information operations, large-scale cyber attacks on Western utilities and infrastructure, or incremental advances on the battlefield that force the West to respond. These are not just possibilities, they're tactics Russia has already used in smaller doses, hacking power grids in Ukraine, launching drone swarms against key supply lines, and orchestrating propaganda campaigns to divide Western societies. Meanwhile, the US and its allies are not standing still. They're balancing the fight in Ukraine with flashpoints in the Middle East, like tensions with Iran and attacks on shipping in the Red Sea, and the ongoing standoff in the Pacific over Taiwan. Add domestic political polarization, election year unpredictability, and economic uncertainty, and you get a scenario where even a small spark in one arena can set off a much larger fire somewhere else. This is the definition of a multi-front, multi-dimensional struggle: military, economic, cyber, psychological. It's a chess game, but with too many boards and not all the pieces moving in plain sight. The most likely flashpoints in this environment are rarely dictated by a dramatic announcement or a circled date. Instead, history tells us that escalation often starts with an accident, a miscalculation, or a series of small steps, none of which seem decisive on their own, but together push the situation over a cliff. Think of the way World War I began, not with a grand plan, but with the compounding effect of alliances, mobilizations, and political blunders. Or the Cuban Missile Crisis. It was a series of misread signals, spy plane flights, and nervous responses that brought the world to the brink. So let's say the impossible did occur. What would that actually look like in real life? Imagine the West suddenly delivers a massive shipment of long-range missiles, or Russia genuinely decides to strike preemptively, convinced that its own survival is at stake. The first true sign wouldn't be a tweet or a news headline, but a rapid ramp-up in classified intelligence traffic. Signal intelligence, or SIGINT, would pick up sudden changes: encrypted military radio chatter, surge in satellite uplinks, movement of mobile command units. Satellite images would reveal the redeployment of elite battalions, new missile launchers rolled out of hidden bunkers, or unusual activity at key air bases. Diplomatic cables would start to flash urgent, with U.S. embassies and allies relaying warnings and seeking updates. And those who watch global security for a living think analysts at NORAD, NATO, and GCHQ would be on high alert, parsing through this mountain of data for patterns and anomalies. On the ground, you'd see large-scale military convoys moving at night, often under cover of civilian traffic, rail lines suddenly closed for maintenance, or ports going silent to civilian shipping. Embassies and expat communities would receive coded warnings, sometimes disguised as travel advisories or security alerts, well before the public caught wind. At the same time, cyber units would escalate operations, testing firewalls, probing for weaknesses in water, power, and communication grids. If you're watching closely, you might notice spikes in cyber probing of Western critical infrastructure, or simultaneous test attacks on government portals and financial networks, moves designed to create confusion and open new fronts. And then there's the market. A real crisis would ripple through global finance almost instantly. Oil prices would jump overnight, sometimes by double digits. Currency markets would react, with the ruble, euro, and dollar all moving sharply as investors try to hedge risk. Insurance rates for shipping and aviation would spike, and you'd see sudden shortages or rerouting in strategic commodities: wheat, natural gas, rare earths. All of this happens before a single shot is fired or a missile lands. The world's sensors, both technological and economic, light up before the event actually breaks into mainstream awareness. By the time anything reaches the news, the professionals will have already seen a dozen warning signs. That's why, here at Safety Zone, we always stress, the gap between rumor and reality is filled with signals, patterns, and real-world indicators for those who know where to look. The point is not to be scared by every headline, but to recognize that escalation, when it comes, leaves footprints. If you're looking for the real risk, don't just watch the calendar. Watch the signs that the machinery of war is actually moving, step by step in the background. The headlines might tell you when to worry, but the world's warning lights always start blinking before the crowd sees them. As for September 1st itself, expect statements, perhaps some saber rattling, but almost certainly not the end of the world that so many are hyping. More likely, the date will come and go, and the crisis will continue on its slow, grinding path, punctuated by moments of drama, but shaped mostly by calculation, not panic. Let's wrap up with a strategic reflection. In today's media environment, attention is currency. The fastest way to profit, politically or financially, is to stoke fear, manufacture urgency, and ride the wave of public anxiety. That's why the most viral stories are rarely the most accurate. If you want to protect yourself and your loved ones, the best thing you can do is stay grounded, look for real-world indicators, understand the mechanisms of escalation, and resist the urge to react to every rumor. Preparation isn't about panic, it's about perspective. If you've made it this far, you're not just chasing the next adrenaline spike. You want the truth behind the headlines, the clarity to know what's real and what's hype. Subscribe to Safety Zone and join a community that refuses to be led by fear. Here, you'll get the updates that matter, the analysis you can trust, and the mindset to navigate whatever comes next, no matter how loud the headlines get.